All right, so what I wanted to talk about right now was walking you through the methods and results section of your final paper. So your final paper, you're going to take your revised version of your introduction/literature review, and then from there, you're going to tack on the remaining sections of the paper. So I'm going to specifically talk about methods and results today, and then from there, you're mostly going to be responsible for creating your discussion section. So focusing mostly on methods and results today. So I'm going to start with your methods. Any of you who have taken 293 with me, this is going to be a rehash of the same way that you've written a methods section before. The only difference is that you're describing a slightly different procedure. But an example paper that I like to use that has a very easy to follow set of methods is in this nostalgia paper on the relationship between nostalgia and feelings of authenticity. So the same paper that, if you've ever heard me talk about sections of a manuscript before, you know I've referenced. So their methods section was broken down much in a way I would recommend you breaking down your methods section, where there's a standalone section dedicated to your participants, so who all actually were in your study. Key information to include here is going to be your sample size, some key demographic information, namely the gender breakdown, how many men versus women versus other identifications, and then the mean and ideally standard deviation for the age. This is just really key demographic information that grounds the reader of your manuscript in terms of who all participated in your study. If you wanted to include other relevant demographic information, like breakdown of ethnicity, you could do that as well. That could be interesting information. Then for materials and procedure, these don't need to be separate sections, although they can be. Materials more so refers to the content from the survey itself, and procedure is more so how the study was conducted. So materials are more so what was it that participants were reading over the course of your study. So if you're using a scale for your dependent variable, for example, you're going to want to include the kind of information that's included here, such as the response format that participants used. A sample item included in quotation marks. A sample item is just a specific question or item from the scale to give the reader an idea of what the scale is about. It's meant to be a single item that represents sort of what the scale is getting at. And you definitely want to include a citation for who actually created the scale. So you're going to want to put that item into quotations and then have an in-text citation for the author, and as well a full citation in the references section. You're going to need to have some key descriptive statistics related to your dependent variable. Namely, you're going to want to have a mean standard deviation and an internal reliability, meaning a Cronbach's alpha, to indicate the internal reliability or coherence of that scale. So by and large, you're going to want to have the following sections represented in your methods section. You can have subheadings devoted to them, or it can just be one large main heading underneath methods, but definitely make sure you talk about participants. You include some key information about them. Procedure is more so how the study was actually conducted. So in your case, it's an online survey administered through Qualtrics, distributed via an anonymous online link. Talk about how you distributed the link. Did you put it on your social media? Did you email it to people? That sort of information would go with the procedure. So then for materials, again, you're going to need any information related to the actual content of the survey that your participants took. So namely, you're going to want to talk about the questions that participants read. You don't need to spend too much time talking about the consent and the debriefing. You can reference that quickly, but that's not really the heart of the study. Definitely make sure that you describe the manipulation that we created together. So talk about your independent variable and how you manipulated it. You can even include the text of your manipulation in quotes. Talk about how you had an experimental condition and a control condition. Then for the dependent variables, since this was for most of you a pre-published scale, all the information I just went through, the name of the scale, referencing the original publication of the scale, a sample item, response format, etc. So then moving on to the results section. Again, if you were in my 293, you did write a results section, so you should hopefully have some familiarity with reporting statistics in APA format. The main difference is that our primary analysis here is not a Pearson's R correlational analysis. It's an analysis of variance. So there's different information that needs to be included. So in terms of getting a handle on reporting statistics in APA format, the resources that I have linked here, also linked in that top module on Canvas on APA formatting. Key things about reporting statistics in APA has to do with, on one hand, what information is included, right? An obtained statistic, degrees of freedom, p-value, and then also some nitpicky things like what's italicized and what's not. So all that information is included and clearly delineated in some of these resources I've listed here. So for example, you're going to need to have a mean and standard deviation for your dependent variable scale. The proper APA formatting for mean and standard deviation looks like this. So typically within parentheses, uppercase M, which is italicized, space around the equal sign, the value of the mean, and then the SD, same thing, capitalized, but it's SD as opposed to just S. That sort of nitpicky format all goes into technically getting statistical APA formatting perfectly correct. So then your primary analyses for your 294 project is not a correlation, but rather an ANOVA. So you can take two different approaches to your analysis, and I encourage you to discuss your data analysis with me in a meeting over the course of the next week and a half. For the main effect of your manipulation, right, you all had an experimental condition and a control condition, and you are looking whether or not those two groups differed on your dependent variable. That means that you can start off with a t-test if you want to just look at the main effect of your manipulation. So if you do that, you report your t-test with a obtained t statistic, as you can see there. There's a lowercase t that is italicized. There within parentheses is the degrees of freedom for your t-test. You'll be able to find that in SPSS. This value here is your obtained t statistic. And then that p represents the significance value. So if there's a significant effect, that would be a p-value of less than equals 0.5. So if you want to report a t-test, make sure that you're following that formatting. Now, technically, you can get away with running a single analysis of variance for your entire analysis. So you do need to make sure that you do a 2x2 ANOVA. A 2x2 ANOVA is an analysis of variance that looks at whether or not two IVs with 2 levels each interact to impact your dependent variable. So the easiest strategy for this will be to look and see whether or not gender, men versus women, respond differently to your manipulation. The idea is that you can look at two independent variables and see whether or not they interact to uniquely impact your DV. So you're going to run this 2x2 ANOVA, and you're going to need to write it up with all of the relevant information, your F statistic, the degrees of freedom, and the p-value. Now, when you do a factorial ANOVA in SPSS, the main effects, so what is the effect of just the manipulation before getting to the impact of the second IV? So technically, you could just do that single 2x2 ANOVA and get the same information that would be gleaned from this t-test. So it's kind of up to you if you want to have a separate t-test and then your 2x2 ANOVA, or if you just want to discuss everything, main effects and interaction in your ANOVA. So the choice is kind of yours. If you do include a t-test, just make sure that you're reporting the relevant statistics. And likewise, for your ANOVA, make sure that you're reporting the relevant statistics there as well. So then you're also going to need to have at least one graphic included in your paper. So formatting for tables and figures in APA is, again, sort of nitpicky. There's stylistic formatting criteria and the like. So it can be a slight pain in the ass, but some of the formatting rules do have to do with some really important features, things like making sure that you have a title, making sure that everything is labeled. So there are a lot of nitpicky things that go into the creation of a graphic in APA, but there is some really important stuff there as well. So you'll need to have at least one graphic, meaning either a table or a figure. The distinction here is that a table is typically a depiction of a series of numerical values. So if you wanted to, let's say, depict the means across the various cells in your 2x2 ANOVA, you might opt to present that information in a table. If you prefer a more graphical depiction, you could take the same information and you could just transform it into a bar chart. So a bar chart instead that depicts the means across the cells from your ANOVA. The choice is kind of yours. Okay, so a figure is going to be any sort of actual graph that you have, so a bar chart, a pie chart, etc. Again, a great choice for this particular project. A bar chart depicting means is a great option. And if you wanted to have some extra graphics in there just to kick things up a notch, you could always have a pie chart depicting things like demographic breakdowns of some relevant demographic characteristic of your participants. Whatever graphic you choose, just make sure that you look into the proper APA formatting. Again, some things are more important, things like making sure you have a title, making sure that the axes are labeled. But then other things can be a little bit more nitpicky, things like what's italicized and what's not. So just try your best there. So then a table, typically a properly formatted APA table, is going to look something like this. So typically I create my tables in Microsoft Word. The easiest way to do this is to create a table with the appropriate number of cells, and then it's mostly a question of removing a lot of the lines that separate the cells. So as you can see here, an APA formatted table, you see that there's no lines separating all the cells here. There's just lines separating the title from the titles of the columns themselves and separating the information from the table from the note below. So whatever choice you go for, a figure, bar chart, pie chart, whatever, versus a table, just make sure that you're looking into the proper formatting that goes into whatever your choice of graphic was. And then in terms of reporting your ANOVA, again, when I talked about statistics review, I found the same paper that has a 2x2 ANOVA. The easiest ways to make sure you're reporting something correctly is to just find a paper that has the same analysis and look and see how it was written up. So in this particular paper, a 2x2 ANOVA looked at the interaction between age and a death anxiety prompt on some series of health-related dependent variables. So key things you're going to have to include when you're talking about this analysis is you're going to have to describe the factorial notation. So 2x2, listing the levels from your independent variables. The results themselves, right? The authors for this particular 2x2 opted to depict the means from their 4 cells using a line chart. It would have been perfectly appropriate for this information to be depicted as a bar chart or the numerical information to be depicted in a table. As long as the information is presented correctly and clearly, your choice of what kind of a figure or a table is all going to be fine. Then in terms of writing up the analyses themselves, you do want to set the reader up for what kind of an ANOVA it was, so a 2x2 listing the levels of your IVs. And you're going to want to describe main effects and interactions. So main effects are going to be the unique effect of each of your IVs individually before you consider them together, right? So was there less health promoting behavior among people in the death anxiety prime, not even taking age into account? They're going to need to report the information for the main effects as well as the information for the interaction. So that's going to do it for walking you through the methods and results section from your manuscript. Again, anyone that took 293 with me, it's going to be pretty similar to what you did in terms of structure, but the specific analyses that you're talking about are going to definitely be different, and you want to make sure that you're describing your independent variable, that is to say your manipulation, when you talk about your materials. So definitely make sure to review the instructions that I posted for the final manuscript, and let me know if you have any other questions. But other than that, that's going to do it for today.